This episode of the Finovate podcast is brought to you by InterSystems, a cloud-first data platform for building high-performance, machine learning-enabled applications that connect data and application silos. Join InterSystems at FinovateFall Digital for their keynote on September 14th.
Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining me on the Finovate podcast. This week we have Scott Gnau, the head of data platforms at InterSystems, joining us. Scott is going to be doing a keynote on stage at FinovateFall Digital 2020 here on September 14th. He's going to be giving us a quick sneak peek at what he's going to be talking about. Scott, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hey, happy to be here.
Excellent. So why don't you start by just giving a quick introduction about yourself and some background on InterSystems?
Sure. So, as mentioned, I'm head of data platforms business at InterSystems, and I've been doing this now for a little over a year. But I've been in the data business for over 30 years, so perhaps I'm dating myself. But I've always been very much interested in data and how data can really enable businesses to be more successful. And this started with, in the late 80s with the adoption of ERP everywhere. All of a sudden, businesses had a whole bunch of transactions that they could collect and build that into what were called data warehouses and use data warehouses to optimize their operations. I did that for about 20 years, and I moved into the big data space. And that was really interesting because in addition to transactions, now with the internet and weblogs and connected devices, there were all kinds of different data that could be included in analytics and could be used to drive better outcomes for businesses. And I've landed here at InterSystems because I've been really compelled by what we're able to do and how that fits into marketplace needs. Because when you look at the last 25 or 30 years of data and analytics, you really think about moving from transactions to being able to have lots of different kinds of data and meld all of that together and put that into solutions that are relevant for today, where you've got the hyper-connected consumers where you need to actually deliver those decisions in milliseconds, really in real time, and combine all of that together. And that's what we do at InterSystems with our data platform technology.
Wow, great. So you've seen quite a few different perspectives on things over the last little bit here. How have the needs of the marketplace changed over that time?
Well, certainly the demands seem to be accelerating, and that makes it interesting for all of us in the business, certainly. But I think there are a couple of things that are kind of converging. Certainly, having broader digital capacity, better connectivity with ubiquitous internet and connectivity through mobile devices means that there's a lot more free-flowing information. And that free-flowing information is yielding much smarter customers. And so on one end, you've now got a bar that's set higher in terms of how you interact with your customers, whether they're consumers or businesses, because they're now connected and have a lot more access to information. And it also means that your competitors, disruptors, and new entrants have lower barriers to entry into the market. And so that really amps up the requirement to do something about it. And so those things have continued to change. And like I said, one thing that's been constant through all of this is just continually more and more data and more access to data. And that drives this accelerating process to much, much smarter customers. And certainly the need to be very agile to look at potential new entrants and competitors.
I think, the much smarter customer piece is one that I can't let go by, because I think sometimes in fintech, we have this perception of, customers as being really frustrating and making decisions that we think are poor and potentially unexplainable. And so this is one of those areas where you ask people in fintech, are your customers smart? And you're going to get some pretty good answers. I've asked this question before and I've gotten some pretty hilarious answers, but it's a really fair point. They're more educated now than they have been ever. There's more information available to them. They're able to get information and make hopefully smarter decisions because of it. So for everybody out there who's had this frustration of, our customers are doing incredibly stupid things and we can't predict them, and why are they doing this? It's worth remembering that 10 years ago, it would have been so much worse. That's enough on that topic, though. I want to move on because there's obviously a really big impact on the technology, the way that these shifts in business have unfolded. So what are you seeing on that side? What is that impact on the kind of underlying technology?
So there are a million different ways to approach answering that question, but I'll try to distill it down into a couple of key concepts, right? First, this is really driving organizations to need to be much more agile. So I talked about accelerating change and accelerating data volumes, and that really drives agility requirements inside of the business. And so underlying that need for agility, you need to use that capability to take all of your corporate knowledge or data to create new applications to provide hyper personalization for this enlightened consumer. It means that to do that effectively, not only do you need to consume more data in terms of volume, but also more data in terms of variety. And unlike in the good old days, the majority of this data may actually come from outside of your company. And so that creates different processing and data management paradigms that you need to build into your overall infrastructure. There's also, in terms of agility, really a big change in terms of performance. And in technology, we talk about performance all the time, and certainly vendors love to talk about performance. I'm not really talking about that. I'm really talking about the ability to deliver business changing decisions in real time or in the right time. And so it's not about just having a faster process, but in fact pushing decision making out to the edge, pushing decision making out to the mobile connected device or to the web browser that your consumer is accessing your infrastructure on. And so that needs new and improved technology architectures. The other thing that happens is, because we have this technology drive and more data and also more processing capacity, we now have access to new ways to create predictive models and new ways to actually be smarter about that hyper personalization. And of course, that's what we all hear about in the press every day with machine learning and artificial intelligence. That's all driven by this super capacity out there in terms of processing capacity and pure data volume availability, because these algorithms get smarter and smarter the more data you give them. And by being able to improve the accuracy of your predictive models, meaning your personalization is better, and to do that in the right time with really good performance is a game changer.
Excellent. Well, when you frame it like that, it obviously sounds like a tall order, and it makes sense that it's straining the kind of legacy tech infrastructure that a lot of firms have in place. One thing that I was curious about, what advice do you have for companies who are looking to really make the most out of the opportunities that exist right now? Obviously, the way the pandemic has affected things has created a lot of challenges. It's also created some opportunities, and there's some ways that you could change the way you do business going forward. What types of piece of advice do you have for people in terms of what they should do next and how they can make sure that they're getting the most out of some of the new capabilities that are out there, and also not necessarily spinning their wheels on something which is going to turn into a dead end or a cul-de-sac at some point down the road?
Sure. I mean, and you hit on one thing. Certainly the current state of the global pandemic and some things that we've seen, that we haven't seen in generations, are really impacting the way we all live, behave, interact, and the way we're required to do business. And that puts a strain on already kind of fragile systems. And so it really is driving, number one, an acceleration on digital transformation efforts across the industry. And we certainly see that, and there are lots of studies out there that are doing it. One key thing to think about in that space is building resiliency into your plan, because yes, we're in the middle of this crisis, but every couple of years, there seems to be some level of a disruptive crisis, whether it's the global financial crisis that happened nearly a decade ago, whether it's political turmoil or change at some part of the world, and anywhere in between. And so one piece of advice is, when you build it, make sure that there is resiliency built in, and not that you can predict the next crisis, but at least understand if there is going to be a sustained spike in data volumes, or if there's going to be a sustained change in your global footprint, how can your systems very quickly adapt to that and not break? And that sounds like a tall order, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get together at the Finovate conference. The next thing to think about is data silos, right? The lifeblood of making these decisions is data. And for years, we've heard about siloed data and inability to kind of pull disparate things together, whether it be one department has their database, another department has their database. That's the old world. In today's world, where a lot of the data is even coming from outside your company, eliminating data silos becomes a really big deal. And doing that in a way that's agile and resilient. So the interoperability and the connective tissue becomes extremely important in this world. Thinking about your architecture for delivering decisions at the right point in time. And that's a combination of what I said earlier, of being able to push decision-making out to the edge to the extent possible. Because even at the speed of light, the round trip to your data center or to the cloud and back may be too long to make a relevant kind of decision. So it's really important to think about the architecture that is involved in doing that. And then, of course, the second piece of that is enhancing those decisions with some of the newer technologies like machine learning and like artificial intelligence. It's not good enough that the data science department is able to traverse all of the data and come up with some interesting models on predictivity. You need to be able to push those models out to the applications that are deployed on the front line of your business so that those enhanced predictions can be used across all of your business processes. And because of the nature of machine learning and AI algorithms, they actually tend to be self-learning, which means over time, they actually help you on the resiliency of that predictive modeling. And, oh, by the way, you need to do all of this in the context of hopefully not spending a whole lot more money or even potentially reducing your overall infrastructure cost.
Yeah, well, you can see that the size of the challenge is immense, and you heard that bell there in the middle, which does mean that we are out of time. But one piece I just wanted to kind of chime in on, I think this, the resiliency is something which you would sort of objectively know, like, yes, we need to build this in. But what we're seeing right now with what's happened in the last 6 months is, a lack of resiliency and how badly that can cost you for people who aren't prepared. And on the flip side, companies who have built that in are able to take some chaotic moments like the ones we've been having and turn them into something which can actually be advantageous. So I love that one. I think that's a really cool one. And, we've just really had time to kind of scratch the surface on what you're going to be speaking about during your keynote at FinovateFall Digital. There are going to be a couple of other key takeaways, some ideas for next steps there. So would encourage anybody who's listening, who's interested in learning more, hearing more from Scott, check him out on the Finovate stage, the virtual stage, I should say, on September 14th, where he'll be keynoting on the first day of the event. Scott, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and sharing this kind of preview of what you're going to be talking about on stage there. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@Finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.